It's 26 minutes now before 9 o'clock on this Tuesday morning, and we thank you for joining us here on Information Radio KWIX, KWIX Moberly. And we're going to have a little bit of a different format today, something of a debate, if you will, a go-between between a couple of guests on a topic. And while we're waiting on one of those guests to call in, which we should expect to hear from him shortly, we do have one gentleman on the line with us so far, and that is Dr. George Ford. Doctor, thanks so much for your time this morning.
I appreciate the time.
All right, Dr. Ford is with the Phoenix Center, and we are going to be discussing the topic of, I think, a broader topic here. We're going to start discussing something referred to as net neutrality or internet neutrality. Was a topic discussed recently by the FCC, and they were talking about things like AT&T and Comcast and other providers slowing or blocking content on the World Wide Web. And I want to start, and I'll give both our guests this opportunity, assuming we get our other guest hooked up here in just a moment. But, Doctor, we'll start with you. And if you would, kind of give us a little bit of an idea when we talk net neutrality, what does that mean?
Well, it's an important question to ask, since I think probably 2 of every 1,000 Americans have actually heard of the idea. But network neutrality really has many meanings, and pretty much everybody has their own perception of what it is. To some people, it's the requirement that communications networks interconnect so that a telephone call originated on a cable network goes through to a traditional telephone network. Some people look at network neutrality as an anti-competitive issue, where, say, if a cable company that provides broadband service also sold books, would the cable company preference its bookstore at the expense of, say, someone like Amazon? Or maybe there's also a definition where there's a fear that the broadcast or the broadband companies may interfere with what you do with the Internet in some way. We had a recent case where Comcast had interfered with a particular software program that uses the Internet in a particular way that was creating a problem on its network with congestion, remedied that problem in a way that some people found offensive. That's another definition of network neutrality. And then there's this other one which drives a lot of the debate at a high level. There's a fear that the broadband providers, the Internet providers, will turn the Internet, which is a multitask network, I mean, everybody that's on the Internet is pretty much doing something different, into something like a broadcast media where you can only access one bank, or you could only access one bookstore, or you could only access one newspaper or something like that. And there's a fear for First Amendment violations and that sort of thing. So when you say what network neutrality is, it's difficult to say generally, because there's so many different perceptions of what it is. So the first thing you do when you discuss the topic with someone is say, what form of network neutrality are you talking about? And then you can proceed to analyze the problem.
All right, Doctor, and I understand now that we are joined now by Tim Karr, who is with SaveTheInternet.com. Tim, do we have you?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, good morning. We started off, while we were getting you hooked up, we started off just simply asking the question of Dr. Ford with the Phoenix Center, what are we referring to, or what is net neutrality? Do you want to elaborate on that thought?
Sure, and it really isn't as complicated as it may have been presented. Net neutrality is simply a rule that was baked into the Internet at its founding. And it basically says that you, as an Internet user, control where you go and what you do on the Internet. And we really take that sort of openness for granted. Every time we boot up the Internet, we go online, we get to choose what websites we go to. And the assumption has always been that the Internet service provider, the company that provides you with a connection, does only that. It provides you with a connection, and then it gets out of the way, allowing you to go onto the World Wide Web and go wherever you want without privileging certain websites against others or blocking your ability to use certain applications or services.
Now, when you say a rule, are you referring to FCC rules, or what are you referring to there?
Well, the FCC is now considering a rule that would make net neutrality more enforceable. But prior to 2005, net neutrality was protected through a set of common carriage rules that allowed people who got on the internet to have this sort of freedom. And that after a period of very serious lobbying by phone and cable companies, those protections have been stripped out of the internet. So what the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is trying to do right now is to proactively put those protections back in place so we have this sort of openness experience on the internet going forward.
All right, Doctor, before we move on, anything you want to elaborate on that point?
Well, first, you could sense immediately that the definition of network neutrality that Tim's talking about is the last one I gave you, where there's a fear that companies will force you into particular websites or something of that nature. That's a very specific definition of it. Also, there's never been a network neutrality rule on the internet, nothing certainly like they've proposed today. Common carriage, which is somewhat what he's referring to, was never applied to cable industry, cable broadband connections, and it doesn't. Common carriage rules don't prohibit much of what people are concerned about. You can charge people different prices and offer different qualities of service under common carriage. You just can't offer it in a discriminatory way. You can't offer it to one customer and not another, but you can offer various levels of quality. And today, I haven't, anybody can go anywhere they want to on the internet, so I don't know really what problem we're trying to solve at the moment.
Well, I can respond to that. The problem has occurred, and your guest had mentioned earlier that Comcast was caught blocking access to certain file share applications on the internet. And we've reached a point now where high-speed internet access is becoming the norm for more and more Americans. And this means that we can do more than simple surfing of the web or checking email, that we can now use a lot of rich media applications like video. We can listen to the radio. We can read newspapers. And this is this sort of new empowerment of users poses a threat to a lot of the internet service providers. These are very large companies like AT&T and Verizon and Comcast that not only provide you with a high-speed internet connection, but are also in the business of providing you with a telephone connection, providing you with video services, the cable services, and things like that. And they see this new internet as a threat to their legacy business models, and have proactively in their actions and in speeches to their shareholders talked about this idea of constricting the internet in ways that wouldn't allow us to have this sort of openness and freedom to choose anymore. These are not just problems that don't exist; they're problems that are documented have been documented over the last 5 years.
I'd like to kind of elaborate. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Doctor.
Yeah, I just wanted to note we just switched from one definition of network neutrality to another there, which is the anti-competitive of implications of the behavior of broadband providers. And the Comcast case it's an interesting case. The broadband providers, particularly cable companies whose networks are designed a little bit differently than the telephone network, have to manage, and telephone networks have to do this too, manage the congestion on their network. And if there's some protocol, in this case it was peer-to-peer protocols, that are specifically designed to override the inherent congestion management protocols of the Internet language, the Internet protocol. I mean, they're designed to do that. Comcast responded in a way to fix the problem, to protect most of its users from congestion caused by very few, using a technology that's primarily used to steal video and music content. So it's more complicated than Tim has made it sound.
If I can go on to another topic here for a moment now, 16 minutes in front of 9 o'clock, and I want to ask I don't know if I'm looking at this from you will let the market sort this problem out on its own perspective maybe, but if we're talking about one internet provider not letting you go to certain sites because they feel that in some way that competes with their own products, so to speak, wouldn't the consumer then have the choice of going to a different internet provider that's not going to do that, or is that an option at this point?
Well, I can attempt to answer that. Certainly, it's a competition argument that you're making. If there is choice among ISPs out there, then naturally the ISPs that are giving consumers a more open experience would be favored. But right now, the marketplace in the United States is limited to what's called a duopoly of providers. More than 96% of all residential high-speed internet connections are provided either by your phone or cable company, the local phone or cable company. In many instances, they have a monopoly over the services locally. So that this idea that choice exists is not borne out by the actual data of broadband access out there. So we do have a choice problem, and we also have in that duopoly both dominant and phone and cable companies that have stated their intention to quote-unquote manage networks in a way that gives them that sort of control over consumer choice for where we want to go when we get online. So it's a twofold problem.
Doctor, did you want to respond to that idea or that
sure,
question?
And I think you make a good point. There is competition for most consumers. There is at least two providers, which is certainly more than you had for multi-channel video service or cable service for many years. So if one carrier chooses to do one thing, certainly the customers can switch to the other. And in a market with few providers, that may be a huge difference. If you're the only guy that can receive the fall off from another firm, then behaving correctly may be a very powerful incentive to do so. The anti-competitive motivations, and we're talking about the anti-competitive motivation for network neutrality now. I mean, we have rules designed to deal with what we call a vertical issue, which is where a company is affiliated with some seller upstream and wants to favor its own sales. There are ways that we deal with that in competitive law in the United States, and the incentives to engage in that behavior are not as clear as some people make them out to believe. So the first thing we have to do is figure out, what are the genuine incentives, and what do consumers really want from the internet. If we have a competition problem, we certainly don't want regulations that make competition weaker than it is today, and that's one great risk of the current network neutrality regulation.
Okay, let's do this then, Tim. If you've got some more you'd like to add, then on that point, we'll go to you. Then we'll give the doctors more time. Then we'll go on to another topic. Tim, did you have some more you want to say?
Sure. I mean, the FCC proceeding that's underway is a very open process, and competition for consumers is one of the issues that they're looking at very closely. There hasn't been a reasonable argument made that net neutrality in any way stifles competition. Net neutrality, I can remember back in the days when we did have net neutrality over phone lines, and a standard common carriage principle where I had in my own, when I checked back then, I had 26 choices of internet service providers. And with the change in the legal structure that got rid of common carriage standards for cable and other high-speed services, you now have only one in terms of that provider. So we do have a competition problem, and the FCC process itself is looking to foster more competition and choice. So there's no conflict there, I think, that I can see between net neutrality and consumer choice.
Okay.
Well,
Doctor, another thought on that point?
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of revisionist history, but network neutrality is a direct assault, particularly in the forms that are promoted by organizations like Tim's, against firms making profits. And when you attack a firm for making profits, then you are going to affect the amount of competition. If you regulate industries, it's typically the case that you have fewer providers, not more providers, particularly in the phone business, which is a very expensive business. I mean, not everybody can just go run a wire to somebody's house. And it's very expensive to do that. So when you begin to assault the ability of the firm A to build its network in a way that's most efficient, which is something network neutrality advocates are trying to do, is affect the way the networks are constructed. If you tell a firm how it manages its network and operates its network, then its profits are going to go down. And if you tell a firm how it can price its services, then its profits are going to go down. Well, if you attack a firm on its cost and its revenues, you're going to change the nature of competition, and you're going to change the number of competitions in an industry like the communications business. It's obvious that that's going to happen.
Quickly, in response to that, the phone and cable companies are not going poor here, and there's nothing about net neutrality that is designed to inhibit their profits. In fact, when you look at the merger between AT&T and Bell South, which occurred at the end of 2006, the FCC did impose a net neutrality condition for the 2 years following that merger. So if you look at the gross profits of the merged entity, AT&T, in 2007 and 2008, under net neutrality, they were massive in the factor of tens of billions of dollars. And in fact, they even invested more in building out new networks under a net neutrality condition. So while I hear this argument that net neutrality somehow inhibits profits, it doesn't seem to be borne out in real market data.
All right, Doctor, I'll give you a moment to respond to that, and then we'll take a break.
This is a classic blinders on case when you have a firm that merges with another, presumably because it increases their profits, and their profits go up, and let's blame it on some condition that the FCC imposes on the firm, one of many conditions that the FCC imposes on the firm. I actually have addressed that issue specifically and gave it a thorough whipping. When you see a firm merge, a government imposes a bunch of conditions on it. One of its businesses, one of its largest businesses, is growing at 40% a year. Its investments may go up. To claim that one of many merger conditions drives that is ridiculous.
As ridiculous is the claim that net neutrality somehow inhibits those profits.
We give you your time. Let's let the doctor speak.
I mean, it's like, and I teach this to my principal students, and I guess some people need to take that course involved in this debate. If you're cold in your house, I mean, what do? You change your thermostat, right? When you change your thermostat, you expect it to get warmer. That is, unless you go open all the windows of your house, and then I don't know what the effect is going to be. To claim that one thing of many things affected or didn't reduce the investments or profits of AT&T after merger is absurd. I mean, many things happen to that company, and it may very well be negative because we don't know what the counterfactual is, which is a statistical concept, which is completely absent from any of these arguments about network neutrality increasing investment or profit.
Well, Dr.
I did say we were going to take a break. We need to get that in. When we come back, we'll continue with the conversation. I want to thank both of my guests, Tim Karr with the SaveTheInternet.com and Dr. George Ford of the Phoenix Center. And when we come back, we'll continue the conversation with those two gentlemen. That's coming up next. 7 minutes now before 9 o'clock, and gentlemen, I think the 7 minutes will go quickly, so we'll try and get right back into it here. And again, I thank you both very much for your time this morning. There's a couple of things that I think are always going to be bigger issues when you look at situations like this, and I want to start with maybe what might be the biggest when we're talking about the Internet. And I think I began the last question with Mr. Karr, so I'll start this one with Dr. Ford. Is this part of a bigger debate about who controls the Internet in general? Whenever you've got an international entity like the Internet, that's a very difficult question, isn't it?
It is, and it's mostly a question, I think, about who controls the Internet. And again, this comes in many dimensions. Are we going to have firms control the Internet doing whatever they want to do, or are we going to have firms under control of regulators doing what the regulators tell them to do, or we're going to have a case where the government owns the Internet? And that's a debate that's actually going on in Washington. And some people view network neutrality, and this is an extreme view, that the government should own the network, should build network, fiber optics to everybody's home, and own that like they own the streets or schools or whatever else, that this is some kind of public good. So that's a very important issue. But control, it has to be. I mean, these are interesting, important questions. But when we think about controlling the network, we have to realize that the firms have to do certain things to make these networks work, okay? And we don't want to impede their abilities to make the network work and be useful to people because we're afraid that something they do may hurt people. I mean, we have to balance our interventions so that we allow the network to be managed and be useful to people, but we try to prohibit anti-competitive behavior in some cases. We don't know exactly what that behavior is going to look like. So passing a rule today that says you can and can't do something is really premature. I mean, we do have rules at the FCC that allow them to respond to cases as they have a couple of times previously.
All right, Tim and gentlemen, both, just because of our limited amount of time, I'd like for you to, we'll just have the one response to this question, then I'll bring back one more point to you before we wrap this up, if that's all right.
Sure.
And Tim, before you respond to the doctor's point, if you would recall, I'm just curious about my original thought. If you would let me know, do you think this is a matter of who controls the Internet? And then please carry on with your thought.
Well, it's pretty clear to me that control of the Internet should reside in the hands of the people who use it every day and in every way. And we have to remember that the Internet is not owned by these very powerful ISPs. They provide a last-mile connection to homes. They sell access to those individuals who supposedly control the Internet. The Internet itself is a network of networks that's beyond any centralized authority, and no one is calling for the government to own that at this point. Certainly nobody who is part of the reasonable debates that are going on inside Washington. What the rules at the FCC propose is a set of openness regulations that apply to those last-mile providers, so that ownership and control of the Internet, control over choice, the ability for us to innovate, to upload applications, to build websites and put them online, resides in the hands of the consumers. So net neutrality is a very consumer-friendly rule that makes sure that control of the Internet doesn't transfer to the connection providers who have demonstrated a desire to manage networks in ways that are discriminatory.
All right. A very good program today, gentlemen, both of you. I want to thank you again for your time today, and we're gonna finish with one more thought here. And because of lack of time, I'll only be able to give you each about a minute on this, so please try to keep your thoughts there. But if you would each kind of update us on, we mentioned that the FCC is weighing this, starting even back in October was the original release that I had that generated this program. What is the status of this? And Tim, we'll start with you.
The status of the FCC rulemaking is that they are now open. They've opened up what's called a docket to public comments, and so the FCC has announced their intention to make a rule. They put forth some language that would help guide the rule in a series of questions, and now they're asking the public to respond. So what we've been doing at Free Press is to make sure that the public gets engaged, that all organizations get engaged in this process. Now, it has a couple of months to play itself out. The comments are due by January 14th, and then there's another period of 3 to 4 months where people can respond to those comments. And then ultimately, by the spring of next year, we will see the FCC making a decision on net neutrality. So it's a very open and public process right now, and we do encourage people who care about this issue to get involved.
All right, Doctor, do you have some more thoughts on the status of this and what you want folks to do?
Sure. Well, Tim, I think, covered the administrative issues, procedural issues. What's going on at the FCC right now is they're receiving comments, and they're studying the issue, and they're realizing they have no idea what they're doing. And they're realizing that if they go in and impose strict rules, that it's going to have detrimental effects to the industry and to jobs and to the quality of experience that people have. So, there's a learning process going on, and people are contributing to it. But, the main thing is that the people who know what they're doing, network engineers and people who run these massive, complex networks, go into the FCC and tell the FCC what's going on, because the FCC doesn't have the skill set to really understand that. And for the communications lawyers and economists and people to make wise decisions that serve the public interest, rather than running all half-cocked, making rules that preference some corporations over others.
And I'm afraid that is all the time that we have. And Dr. George Ford with the Phoenix Center and Tim Karr with SaveTheInternet.com, our guest today. Gentlemen, thank you very much. A good conversation today. And I know, I think you both made very good points, and I know I remain undecided. Thank you very much.
All right, Mike. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, Tim.
All right.